Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The session today will focus on the question of connecting supplier data silos. Data, or more specifically, clean and easily accessible data, is of course high on the agenda for organizations seeking to further digitalize their procurement functions and stay ahead of the competition. So this topic is front of mind for many. One of the reasons is a few years ago, Gartner predicted that by 2022, so today, 90% of all corporate strategies will detail information as a critical enterprise asset and analytics data as an essential competency. So as we reflect on where we're up to in 2022 now, we see that enterprises are being challenged with how to turn this information into a real asset, and many are seeking to overcome the obstacles. So it's vital to have excellent data quality and excellent integration, two areas that Costas Xyloyiannis, CEO here at HICX, is especially deep in expertise on and is therefore a formidable guide for this topic. I started off by asking Costas to provide some context on where we started and where we're going next, and why best of breed has largely become the favoured approach.
So 50 years ago, we started with the idea of ERP, probably even longer than that, and then that didn't quite cut it. We were challenged with data, with user experience. So then, at least in the procurement space, you had these source to settle suites, which started to come up, like the Rebas and the Coupas and the Jagger and Evaluas. And of course, now the next ecosystem is being predicted that actually these suites aren't really any better than the ERP, and the real way to go is with a best of breed approach. So we may even see that as data silos, but the idea of one system is going to disappear over time, and you'll end up with many different systems. And I think that's what you're seeing in the marketplace. We're not going to gravitate towards one single system. We're going to need to have many different systems. So it's about how do we make our data flows across systems being connected rather than doing everything in one single system.
Of course, we have seen countless surveys where data quality and integration continue to be cited as reasons for barriers to digital transformation. So, why do these barriers continue to persist? What's the issue?
It's because it's pretty complicated when you really think about it. You have a lot of different suppliers. Every function in the organization is probably going to touch a supplier in one way or another, whether they're buying marketing services, consultant services, products, goods, travel. So it touches everyone. It's very, very varied, right? Depending on what we buy, where we're buying it, where's the supplier located, all sorts of risks we have to manage. We could have many systems, we could manage our categories differently. Some are led centrally, some are led locally with market facing functions, some are not owned by procurement. So when you take into consideration this type of landscape, it's pretty evident that it's not that easy to actually fit everything in under one umbrella, and why most mature organizations are also gravitating more to multiple systems and best of breed systems. So you may see that, for catalog buying, we might use a Coupa or Amazon Business, but for services, we're going to use Fieldglass. And for direct procurement, a lot of organizations feel very, very comfortable and do it in their ERP. And for travel, we're going to use Concur. So there's a whole host of specialist systems, and that's really the way to go, because of course there you have much better user experience around the service of what it is you're buying or offering the organization. So rather than less systems, what you see is you're going to have more systems. So it's imperative to have a way to be able to have a simple way and a systematic way to connect systems and make data flow between systems easily. Now, just to summarize what we've just seen, but typical challenges then are going to be diverse stakeholders. So, you've got centralized or shared service functions, you've got market-facing functions, you have ERP systems, P2P systems. I consider them stakeholders as they consume the data. You have the supplier as well, who's a stakeholder here, if you want to look at it like that. Technology integration. So it's often perceived by most organizations, both on the business and IT side, that's something which is complicated to set up, costly to operate, difficult to change, and something which is prone to failure. And of course, this leads to data quality issues. So again, inconsistent, inaccurate, or incomplete. And the last challenge here is obviously the amount of variation which you need, because every supplier is different. There's so much data, can change throughout all parts of the organization. So it's high volume and hard to control. So how do we deal with all these things, and how do we bring it all together? Well, first of all, the idea of how we connect data silos, and sorry if we disappoint anyone, it's not a technology or system issue. It's actually a data governance issue, as we're going to see. Technology and integration has been around for a long, long time. It's actually very easy to integrate and connect systems. The challenge is the data. The data between different systems is structured differently. Every system is selfish in a way, and it thinks of, how do I need supplier data to fulfill what I'm trying to do? And they, of course, are not going to do it in the same way. So it's not about the technology. It's about data, which is the challenge around how we make data flow and how we're going to connect our data silos in a consistent and sustainable way. Now, the 5 steps which we need to consider here in terms of an approach, first and foremost, we need a data and information governance framework. Okay, that's the overarching framework around how we govern and do things, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then also, thinking about this, you need to consider that it's also a cultural and a mentality kind of shift within the organization. And of course, in the era of digital, this is becoming easier to get senior stakeholder buy-in, but it's imperative that we have top-down buy-in from leadership. So we prioritize the need to have excellent data, and then that gets embedded into us as an organization, where we don't see data management as something back office and clerical, but actually, this is our competitive differentiator, and we have to curate it and see it as a priority, and also invest a certain amount of time and effort and resource into it. Then we would need a way to unify all this information. So a supplier information management platform which can consolidate, integrate, and govern the data across all these different systems. Once we do that, to make sure our work doesn't go to waste, we need to make sure that we're controlling the entry point. And what this really means is that we're defining and doing processes in a way which yield excellent data, not as an afterthought, but really upfront. And once we've established all these things, then we can progressively look to clean up the history of bad data and information, which has accumulated in all our different silos over a long period of time.
So we have data governance as the key starting point here. And I just wanted to reflect on an oft-cited quotation, which is this: only 2 moments matter in a piece of data's lifetime: the moment it is created and the moment it is used. Now, this might be an oversimplification, but it does serve as a great starting point. Now, data quality is actually created when the data is created. So that creation point determines the quality of the data for the rest of its lifetime. It's at the point of use when people typically identify the problems. It's difficult to bring it together, for example, or this certain figure is wrong, or something has been assigned to the wrong supplier or to the wrong category. Costas, what are your thoughts on this point?
This is really the challenge, is how can we connect and shorten the cycle in order to have good data quality? And if we understand this, then of course it makes the rest of the process much easier.
Of course, one of the central issues central to governance and supplier master data is the question of who owns this in an organization. IT, accounts payable, procurement, shared services all come to mind. And what you find is that in a lot of organizations, it's not a clear-cut answer necessarily, because various functions may own only part of the data, or the data for some suppliers, but not all of them, or only some of the fields. Some only use data strategically, so they depend on it without owning it. So I'll turn back to Costas now for his thoughts on that point, and to put the question, why does it make connecting data silos so hard?
So it's a common theme that this first has to be figured out, and we need to have some ownership before we can start to do something about it. And in essence, what makes connecting data silos so difficult? Well, as it's probably pretty evident with what we're reinforcing here, it's a lack of governance and ownership. And this lack of governance leads to bad data. And obviously, bad data and created inconsistently means we're unable to easily connect or use this information. Okay. And of course, there are several factors which lead to that. Number one is the organizational and people element, which we talked about. Ownership isn't clear. We haven't really defined also how we measure quality of data, who will be accountable for that. It's typically perceived as admin non-value add work. So that's been one big reason. Obviously, there's also in most cases no processes around data governance. So if you look at most systems that have supplier data in them, you can just fill in a form, with 10, 20 fields, and you've created a supplier. So it's very standalone, and there's no definition around how that should happen. And then also there's a system element to highlight here. So what a lot of organizations have done is also tried to manage master data in so-called transactional systems, whether that's the ERP or the P2P system, which is built around orders and invoices. And of course, this is one use case, and when you try to put data into other systems, it doesn't really work. So it's obviously ill fit for business. And it's also, the system does not allow front end business users. If you want to create this culture and this notion that we care about data, it should be front end users who have the ability to change things on the fly, kind of like Wikipedia works, and why you have such a large and fragmented um, set of information which can be easily maintained and governed, right? You have content owners, and when you change something in your area, someone approves it and it's done perfectly. And you should see it in the same way that anyone could influence the data, and then you have an owner and it's approved, and then it's synchronized across all your different systems. So that's the idea and the mentality which you would obviously want to get to.
And why have so many organisations failed to solve the challenge, as it seems on paper to be relatively straightforward? What's holding it back?
You're large, you're complicated, multi-geography, multi-business unit, many ERPs, a lot of supplier data, a lot of silos. So with that, it's easy to be overwhelmed, and it's going to be super challenging. So we're going to look at for quick wins and how can we solve this quickly, because it's not going to be that easy to go through and clean all this up. So a lot will gravitate to this notion of single system. So a lot of people you'll hear saying also in IT that, oh, well, if we sacrifice on functionality, at least we'll have a single system and then our data will be better. And of course, we've seen now with history that, that's not solving it. We go back to the Deloitte CPO survey, where all these procurement officers who are using, Arebas and Jaggers and Coupas, of course, know that this is not solving their data challenges. Or a lot of organizations are driven by the ERP. Well, we'll just manage it around how our ERP needs it. And then, of course, you realize that the ERP, again, is a transactional system. So feeding data across to other systems isn't necessarily that easy. Or we could say that, well, if I clean up my data, then I'm going to solve it. Again, this won't solve it, because the just as quickly as you're cleaning data, you're creating new bad data. So it becomes effectively a process of never-ending cleaning. Some could also gravitate to the idea of policy. So especially if they're very large and very decentralized, you could say, well, we're going to put a data governance policy in place. What are our standards? And then, everyone's obviously going to have to conform and follow the policy, which we know doesn't work. It's very difficult to police and manage like that. Or we could outsource it. It's a lot of effort, so we can ship it out to someone else to fix it. And again, reality, like most outsourcing engagements, which large organizations will have probably felt, is if we can't fix it internally, it's even more difficult to do it when we ship it out, and also we ship out all the competency which we eventually had. And the other very common approach to trying to solve this is we can use a data provider. Dun & Bradstreet, Bureau van Dijk, Experian, LexisNexis, they all have this type of data. Why don't they clean it for us? Again, the pitfall here is If you're going to just use it to analyze the data, this might work. But if you want to update the data back into your systems of record, into your data silos, no one will ever do that because it's a huge amount of risk to get back 50,000 records from DNB and then go and update all your supplier information at once, and suddenly you have orders and invoice and deliveries going to different places. So, but these are typically the things which most organizations will at least try to do first before they realize, well, maybe we need to look at it from a different point of view. And what's that different point of view? It is data governance. So this is what makes it a sustainable approach to ensuring high quality data. And data governance is maybe misunderstood, but it's a pretty straightforward thing to understand. Effectively, it's a framework to proactively manage supplier data. And keyword here is proactively, not retrospectively, which happens in a lot of cases. So this would mean who owns data, what do we mean by the data, how is it going to be used, making sure that the people create it and the people who use it are well aligned, ensuring that we have a process around how we clean up, it's not a one-off, and that we're actually embedding it into real business processes. A lot of times we often see that these siloed data management functions are set up centrally, which is actually a mistake because you again are going to detach the people that create the data and the people that use the data. If you want to be successful and have good data, it has to be something which is embedded into the real front-end business processes. Okay, and ultimately that is what's going to survive because people in functions change, systems change, and your approach and framework is what's going to maintain and ensure that you're going to have high quality data all the time. Now, for us, we've learned that if you want to deploy this within an organization, and we're not going to go into everything into a huge amount of detail today, but you're going to have the right approach and methodology in terms of doing that. And it starts off first with the idea of strategy and having that clear objective of our end state and clear executive sponsorship from the top down to governance to process and data and then the system. And the system is the least most important thing, by the way. Many people believe that this is a technology or system issue. It is not. That is the third most important thing here. And oftentimes what you'll see is people will want to address this with a system, which is a component, but it's not the final solution. And they'll go and pick a system and then try and fit everything else around that system. And of course, you need to flip it around on its head and go the other way around. And if we do it in the correct way, then actually the system and the implementation and the rollout becomes very, very easy. And some of the things we need to think about when we're going to deploy this, we have to think in terms of governance, like a data governance board. So how will this work operationally? Because eventually when you centralize or if you're sharing data across many different silos, you're no longer independent. So you have to have someone who can make decision making efficient with the right representation. We need clear roles and responsibilities. We need an organization. A board should also be putting in place things like standards and definitions, things like how we measure data quality. So these are all the typical elements you will have in an organization. In other functions, we need to do the same when it comes to supplier data. Once we have this, then we can define our processes around cleanup, consolidation, and maintenance. And then finally, we would leverage a system to support us to achieve our objectives. But only once we've done these things do we leverage a system to actually help us and support.
And next, what are the steps for implementing this?
So typically, if you're thinking about doing this and wondering how would we approach it, we tend to break it down into 3 phases. So governance and organization definition, consolidation, and then the maintenance, which basically maintenance is like a sustained phase because at the end of the day, once you connect your silos and you've consolidated things, you want to make sure that they are constantly connected and that it's not something which is going to go to waste. So that ensures that our efforts basically don't go to waste. And Few elements around governance and definitions, so you get a feel, and we're not going to cover all of them, but you need to get everyone in the organization aligned around what we're talking about. And sometimes it might seem silly, but it could be around, what do we mean when we talk about a supplier? Because obviously someone looking at a spend report may be interested in the overall parent company. Someone who is busy around invoices and orders and receiving goods is very interested around delivery location. Someone in a contract management system is very interested at a legal entity level of a supplier. So all these things need to be defined and aligned within the organization, and understand what each system needs before you're going to actually be able to easily connect this information in a way which is sustainable and very self-service, right? We can always do manual things, but here we're looking at what is the long-term fix to some of these challenges within a large organization. So little things like that give you an idea what we mean when it's talking about having clear definitions. Another important area to also address is knowing who your data stakeholders are, which are working in the different silos, okay? And of course, that is the reason why silos get created, is because we have different needs. And then when we're not served or we need independence, we go and do that on our own, or we've bought a company. So we need to understand that before we can fix that. And we tend to think of 4 key areas. Number 1 is the system, by the way, whether it's the ERP, the P2P, the contract management system, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, a system is a data stakeholder, no different than anyone else. They're not the master, they're not the source, but they are one consumer of supplier data potentially. Then you could have a local or internal organizational view. Okay, so if I'm the person, in Germany, I want to see my view. If I'm the person in that division, I want to see my view. Then you would have a supplier perspective, because again, if you want to involve the supplier in the long run to make this more self-service around the maintenance, you also need to cater to the way a supplier needs to look at their data. They're not interested at having to maintain data how you maintain it across 20 different ERP systems. And then finally, we have an analytical view, which is a consolidated upward view of supplier into hierarchies, which serves, again, more of the analyst or global organization perspective. So we need to have this understanding before we're going to successfully bring things together. And the last element I will touch with in this kind of initial phase is there's a need for an organization, okay, and that whole governance structure defined from an organizational point of view. It's probably naive to think that you can get things done in a large organization without having defined roles, responsibilities, and people to do things. And of course, there's more the doers, there's people that ensure policy, there's people that define policy at the different levels, but that has to be defined in order for us to be able to be, again, successful here when we go into execution mode. Now, the main thing then we're trying to get to here, by the way, is to create one entry point for all supplier data and information, by the way. This is what we talked about next. So we have to control the entry point, and this is what everyone is trying to get to as quickly as possible. It's the most sustainable way of doing things, rather than create it in 10 different systems and then struggling to bring it together. After we've cleaned it up, we need to get to one entry point and then feed it down into different systems. And why is this principle so important? To illustrate why it's so important, we've borrowed from an analogy around how ocean cleanup needs to happen, by the way. And it's also the big secret to our success. A lot of people think that cleansing is the real key here. It's not. The same way as Richard Thompson, who is a famous environmentalist, basically the way to do that, actually, to clean up the ocean, 95% of it is to stop polluting. And then 5% is on cleanup. And it's the same when it comes to your data and data silos and bad data. It's not a data cleansing, it's not an integration challenge. It's figuring out a way to centralize and get control as quickly as possible And once we have controlled the entry point, then it becomes much easier to begin to do this cleanup. Okay, and it's significantly easier, by the way, because some records we won't use after a period of time, so things will start to clean itself. So you need to think about it that cleanup happens afterwards. We need to get centralized control as quickly as possible if we want to do this in a sustainable way.
All right, so that's phase one. What comes next?
The next phase is actually going to be the bringing the data together. It's really about data consolidation and integration. And again, here cleansing isn't that important. We're not interested whether it's limited or LTD. These details are very unimportant. The main thing, as we said, is we want to centralize the data as quickly as possible. So this will be supported with a system to help pull data in, match it, merge it, and then you end up with gold copies, which basically means I have one golden record, which is linked to many different records within my different data silos. Okay. And once we've done this exercise, which again, that has to be fulfilled, by the way, by this data management or maintenance organization. It's not something which necessarily can be fully outsourced because you're talking about having an understanding of who uses what data. But of course, a system makes it dramatically easier to do this. It's not something which you should embark on doing in an Excel sheet. That obviously isn't going to work. And then the last part is, how do we make sure this is sustainable? And it goes into the idea of lifecycle management around supplier data. Okay, and for us, the way we've been successful is to not do this in the traditional master data management way, which some may be familiar with, sort of old school tools like IBM or Informatica or SAP, where it was very IT driven. That is not the right way to do it. That is not kind of the future concept. The idea is embedded with front-end business users to be able to speak their language around, you need to onboard a supplier, you have to update, we need to deactivate, we need to reactivate. So something which can be initiated directly by front-end users and suppliers in a collaborative manner. Okay, and of course, this happens in one place, and then any system which needs it automatically gets synchronized directly. So if we change it in one place, or even if the supplier tells you they want something updated, or a category manager, or whoever it is, it's done in one place, and then it's synchronized appropriately with the appropriate governance model to the right system. So again, think Wikipedia. You will have different content owners because, by the way, master data is just the initial area. Of course, we talk about data and information because your silos will not just have master data, there will be all kinds of information. So the idea is you have different owners of different types of content, and that can all be centrally managed and then synchronized accordingly to the different systems. Okay, so this will mean that whatever work we've done now, and any new record or piece of data which comes in, it is automatically connected and it's consistent for that same thing across any system. Just want to summarize and leave you with some key takeaways here. So that's the approach, but things to remember is, number one, connecting data silos is not about systems or integration per se. It's a data challenge, a data governance issue, right? So always start with governance and clear objectives around your end state. Be aware that it is a culture shift. We need to, as organizations, be prioritizing data, which means whenever we think about any business process, we have to be thinking with a data quality first mentality, not as an afterthought. You know, you can do many things retrospectively, but if you want to do it efficiently, you will do it upfront and proactively. Imperative to success is executive buy-in. So you need that. Again, I think for a lot of organizations with the digital agenda, it's become very clear that this is prioritized, but if not, you need to make sure that you have senior level sponsorship around this. Data cleansing should not be done in isolation, so it's a waste of time and money if we try and go and clean up data without having this overarching approach of how do we actually do this in a way where our efforts don't go to waste. Also to note, because it's often asked, can we not use machine learning and AI to clean up the data? The answer, similar to why you can't use DNB, is that actually, if you're going to update your systems of records, it's at this point too risky to do that. Obviously, if you're doing it for analysis, you could do that. But if you want to do it in your operational systems, it's impossible today to do that without the assistance of humans to some degree. Key watch out is don't use transactional systems to manage master data. This has led a lot of organizations into sort of dead ends because number one, not every transactional system has all your data, and number two, they're not fit for purpose. So this was quite misleading when at some point a lot of suites had this notion of supplier information management, where of course after they used it, they saw that it wasn't. It was purely fulfilling the need for that transactional system. You will have many transactional systems. You need something which sits outside of a transactional system. And the last thing is, get started. We see a lot of time being spent figuring out how to do it quickly because the task seems so daunting. And our view is once you know what to do and how to go about it, it's actually not that bad. And people are worried about this cleanup exercise. As we said, cleanup is 5% of it. If you do everything else correct, the cleanup is going to be really, really easy. So parting words are get started, don't worry about it. It's not that difficult.
Well, thank you very much to Costas for sharing that information. Loads to digest and work through there. And I hope everybody joining us today found it useful and that you enjoyed the webinar. Just a reminder that all the information discussed today and lots more detail besides can be found in our associated report, How to Connect Data Silos, and the link can be found in the chat box under handouts. Also, best of breed has been mentioned, so I wanted to point out that we have a dedicated resource hub for this that houses a range of materials relating to implementing best of breed strategies, which you can find on our website at HICX.com under company and key topics. The link is on the screen there as well, and also again under handouts. And for all the questions relating to these topics, we will come back to you directly. Thanks very much again. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of day.